Confess your guilt, you liar!
16 hours on my feet, and these two idiots think I'm a drug mule. Naomi Burns said it to no one, to the rain-streaked windshield, to the particular darkness of a Baltimore Tuesday at 1:47 in the morning. The words came out flat and tired, which was the correct register for Naomi Burns. Logistics coordinator, mid-level, unremarkable. The kind of woman who worked late because the job required it and who drove home alone because there was no one waiting. The words did not come from Special Agent Naomi Carter, 11-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration's Baltimore field office, 20 months into the deepest undercover assignment of her career. Special Agent Carter did not speak aloud in moving vehicles. Special Agent Carter was, at this particular moment, stored somewhere behind the eyes and below the exhaustion, watching the road through Naomi Burns's windshield and doing what she always did in the spaces between performances, running the numbers. 11 days. That was what remained of Operation Sandstorm. 11 days until the final coordinated takedown of Miguel Reyes's East Coast distribution network. The most sophisticated cartel logistics operation the DEA's Baltimore office had attempted to dismantle in 14 years. 20 months of work. 43 individuals identified and surveilled. 16 locations mapped. Enough evidence to put Reyes away for the rest of his functional life and take 11 of his lieutenants with him. 11 days. She had spent the past 16 hours in a converted warehouse in Curtis Bay, managing a handoff logistics meeting with 3 men who would have killed her between one breath and the next if they had suspected a single fraction of what she actually was. She had sat across a folding table from a man named Cortez, Reyes's logistics head, her direct contact for the past 14 months, and discussed shipment schedules, transit routes, and driver rotations with the specific fluency of a woman who had been doing this job long enough to know it from the inside. She had made notes on a legal pad in the shorthand that Naomi Burns used, which was different from the shorthand Naomi Carter used, which was itself a discipline she had developed in the first month of the assignment and maintained without deviation every day since. The discipline of being 2 people simultaneously was not something that got easier with time. It got more precise. You learned exactly where the seams were, which pressures tested them, which moments required the most careful maintenance of the boundary between who you were performing and who you actually were. 16 hours with Cortez and his associates required a specific quality of alertness that left the body feeling scraped hollow afterward, present for everything, registering everything, showing nothing that wasn't Naomi Burns. Now she was alone on Delaware Avenue at 1:47 in the morning, heading for the DEA's secondary safe house 3 miles east. And Naomi Burns was tired enough to make a quiet joke to the windshield. And Naomi Carter was running the numbers. And neither of them saw the red and blue lights coming until they were already in the mirror. She checked everything in the span of 2 seconds. Speedometer, 4 miles below the limit. Registration, clean, current, in Naomi Burns's name with a Columbus. Ohio address, taillights, functional. She had checked them at the warehouse before she left because she always checked them. Insurance, current. The alias documentation in the center console had been prepared by the DEA's Cover Operations Unit and had survived scrutiny at 2 previous traffic stops during the assignment without issue. She signaled. She pulled to the shoulder with the smooth, deliberate ease of a woman who has nothing to hide and knows the procedure. She shifted into park, killed the headlights, and placed both hands flat on the top of the steering wheel where they would be visible from outside. Then she waited. She heard 2 car doors. That was the first thing she registered. Not 1 officer, but 2, which meant a full unit, which meant this was not a courtesy stop. She heard the footsteps split, one approaching the driver's side, one hanging back near the rear quarter panel. Trained deployment. She filed it. The flashlight hit her face before the officer reached the window. She turned her head 3 degrees to the left, enough to reduce the blinding effect without appearing to flinch, and kept her hands visible and flat. The officer who appeared at her window was broad across the shoulders, with a tight buzz cut going gray at the temples and a face that had settled into an expression of low-grade contempt so permanently that she suspected he wore it to dinner. His nameplate read, Calloway. He positioned the flashlight so it was aimed directly at her pupils rather than the vehicle interior, which was not standard procedure and was entirely intentional. She clocked him in 4 seconds. The way he held the flashlight as a control instrument rather than a visibility tool. The way his eyes went to the back seat before he had processed anything about the driver. The way his weight shifted to his right hip, toward his utility belt, toward the gun, before she had said a single word. He was not here because of a traffic violation. He was here because he had seen a black woman driving a relatively new sedan in this neighborhood at this hour and had made a series of decisions that were now going to require her to spend the next several hours being careful. License and registration, Calloway said. Not asked. Said, "Good evening, officer." Naomi Burns's voice was clear, calm, and slightly tired, the tiredness of a woman coming off a long shift. Not the tiredness of a woman running 20 months of federal surveillance. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat and the registration is in the center console. May I reach for them? Make it slow. She retrieved both documents with the deliberate but visible movements of a person who understands that speed is interpreted as threat. She handed them through the window without comment. Calloway took them without looking at them. He was still looking at her. "Where are you coming from at this hour?" "Work," she said simply. "Late shift." "What kind of work?" "Logistics coordination. Supply chain." The answer Naomi Burns always gave, boring enough to be true. Calloway glanced at the license for approximately 1 second, not long enough to read it. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi's training ran the calculation automatically, the way it always did when a situation developed its own gravity. What does compliance cost? What does resistance cost? What does the mission require? The answer came back in under a second. Exposing her federal identity now, pulling the DEA badge from the hidden compartment built into her purse, showing the credentials that would stop this in 15 seconds, would burn 20 months of operational work. It would alert every cartel associate who had contact with Naomi Burns that she was federal. It would reach Miguel Reyes within hours. Operation Sandstorm would be finished, and 11 days of work would vanish, and 38 people who needed to be arrested would scatter into the country like smoke. She was also, she noted with the clinical detachment of long training, perfectly aware that what was happening to her had happened to her brother Darius 6 years ago on a street 3 miles from here. He had not had the option of choosing not to comply. He had not had a federal badge in a hidden compartment. He had simply been a 19-year-old in a car, and the calculation had been made for him before he said a single word. She opened the door. She stepped out into the cold November drizzle. "Face the vehicle," Calloway said. "Hands on the roof." She turned. The cold metal of the car roof bit into her palms. Behind her, she heard the second officer, she had not gotten a look at him yet, move toward the open driver's side door. "I'm going to conduct a visual inspection of the vehicle interior," the second officer called out. His voice was younger, slightly less assured. "I don't consent to a search," Naomi said clearly, pitching her voice to carry, not loud, just audible, on record, for whatever recording was being made by whoever might be watching, because Naomi Carter always assumed someone was watching. "I smell marijuana," Calloway said. He pressed his forearm against her upper back, not hard enough to constitute assault by any narrow definition, but hard enough to establish that her body was currently under his physical control. That gives us probable cause. He had not smelled marijuana. There was no marijuana. The inside of her vehicle smelled of rain and the specific combination of coffee and industrial cleaning product that characterized the Curtis Bay warehouse. She had been in that warehouse for 16 hours, and she knew exactly what it smelled like, and marijuana was not part of it. She closed her eyes and listened. The sounds from inside the car were specific and sequential. She heard the center console open. She heard the glove compartment. She heard the rustle of papers, the registration, the insurance card, the maintenance records that Naomi Burns kept because Naomi Burns was organized. And then she heard something else, a crinkling, plastic, thick, the sound of a sealed bag being manipulated, not from inside the vehicle, from outside it, from the direction of the second officer's position. She knew that sound. She had been a DEA agent for 11 years. She had processed evidence from hundreds of drug arrests. She knew the difference between the sound of a bag being found and the sound of a bag being produced. "Well," the second officer said, and his voice had the slightly strained quality of a person performing an emotion they do not entirely feel. "Look at that." He emerged from the vehicle holding a clear evidence bag. Inside it, clearly visible, was a dark substance pressed into a solid block. Heroin, or what appeared to be heroin. 85 grams, minimum. "Found it under the driver's seat," he said. Calloway's forearm lifted from her back. She heard the satisfaction in his exhale, the specific, quiet pleasure of a man who has done this before and is used to it working. "There it is," he said, almost bored. "Mandatory minimum, 10 years minimum for that weight. Should have stayed home tonight." Naomi did not respond. She was doing the things she did when the situation required the most from her. She was being completely still, inside and outside, while her mind moved very fast through the architecture of what came next. The second officer came around to her side of the vehicle. She got her first look at him, younger than Calloway by at least a decade. Hispanic, a nameplate that read, Ruiz. He had the eyes of someone who has just done something he will be thinking about for a long time. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked like a man who has made a choice and is already in the early stages of trying to justify it to himself. Calloway pulled her wrists behind her back. The handcuffs went on with practiced efficiency, tight, the metal biting into the tendons of her wrists with unnecessary pressure that was not accident. Resisting arrest, making false allegations against an officer, he said, listing it like a menu. "You want to keep adding charges, or are you done?" "That is not my property," Naomi said. Her voice was level. "You and I both know Officer Ruiz removed that bag from his own person and placed it in my vehicle." Calloway laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. He steered her toward the cruiser by the upper arm. She was placed in the back seat. The hard plastic, the metal cage separating her from the front, the smell of the space, stale and close and designed to communicate powerlessness. The cruiser pulled away from the shoulder. Naomi's vehicle sat abandoned on Delaware Avenue in the rain, her coffee in the cup holder still warm. She looked at the back of Calloway's head, his neck thick above his collar, his hands relaxed on the wheel, the posture of a man who expects no complications. She thought about Darius, 19 years old, a car on a street 3 miles from here. The same calculation made for him before he could make it for himself. 3 years inside. The conviction eventually overturned on a technicality, not because anyone fought hard enough for him fast enough, but because a records clerk made an error that a public defender caught 18 months in 3 years. The shape of a person, permanently altered. She had joined the DEA the year Darius came home. She had told herself it was because she wanted to take actual poison off actual streets, which was true. She had not told herself the other part, the part that was also true, that she had wanted to understand the machine from the inside, from the part that could reach into it and change something. Because watching it from outside while it processed her brother had been the most helpless she had ever felt in her life. And she had resolved then that she would never be that helpless again. She had spent 11 years trying to fix a machine. Tonight, the machine had picked her up. She looked at the rain on the cruiser's window. She let the thought settle without dramatizing it. Then she filed it and began to plan. "Name?" the desk sergeant said. "Naomi Burns?" she said. "Date of birth?" She gave Naomi Burns's date of birth. March 14th, 1991. Columbus, Ohio. The same date she had given at 2 previous routine checks during the assignment. The same date on the Ohio driver's license that Calloway had barely looked at. The same date in the DEA's cover file that had been built and backstopped over 20 months of careful construction. Central booking at 2:30 in the morning was its own particular world. The fluorescent lights had the yellow-white quality of illumination that was designed for function and had given up entirely on anything else. The cinder block walls were painted the specific institutional green that appears in hospitals and prisons and government facilities. The green of a color that was once considered calming and has since been reconsidered. The sounds were layered. Phones, doors, the particular vocal texture of exhausted people in stressful circumstances, the mechanical rhythm of the booking process running through its steps. Calloway kept his hand on her upper arm as he walked her to the intake counter. Not a grip, a presence, the communication of ownership that she had seen officers use before and recognized as a specific kind of language. She did not react to it. She walked at the pace he set, which was his pace and not hers. And she processed the environment around her with the part of her mind that had been trained to process environments even when the rest of her was otherwise occupied. 3 security cameras, 1 angled slightly off-axis above the intake desk, 2 working correctly, 1 at the far end of the room, 1 covering the fingerprint station. Recording. Good. "Found it under the driver's seat," Calloway told the desk sergeant, dropping the evidence bag on the counter. "Intent to distribute, possession of a Schedule I narcotic, resisting, making false allegations, the whole package." He said it with the fluency of a man reading from a memorized list, which was because he was. The desk sergeant, a tired man with dark circles, and the particular economy of motion that develops in people who do the same thing every day for many years, looked at the evidence bag. He typed without looking at the keyboard. "First offense? Clean record," Calloway said, "which just means she hasn't been caught before." The desk sergeant looked at Naomi briefly, looked back at his screen, typed. The fingerprint station was 4 feet to the left of the intake desk, a digital scanner, current generation, connected to the automated fingerprint identification system. The booking officer, a civilian employee, not a cop, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, took Naomi's right hand and rolled each finger across the glass plate with the practiced efficiency of someone who does this 200 times a week. Naomi watched the screen. When a federal agent enters deep cover, the DEA's Cover Operations Unit creates what is internally referred to as a ghost profile, a complete civilian identity layered over the agent's actual federal fingerprint record in the AFIS system. To any local or state terminal running a standard check, the screen returns the civilian identity with a clean record. Naomi Burns, Columbus, Ohio. No prior arrests, no wants or warrants. The ghost profile was current. She had confirmed it at the start of the assignment and at 3 subsequent check-ins. The screen flashed green. No prior record identified. "Clean," the booking officer noted. with mild surprise. "First time getting caught," Ruiz said from across the room. He had been quiet since the car. He said it now with the performance of someone who has decided to commit to the role, rather than stand outside it. Naomi registered the effort and filed it. What neither Calloway nor Ruiz knew, what almost no one outside the DEA's Cover Operations Unit knew, was that the ghost profile had a secondary function built in by the unit's technical director 3 years earlier, in response to a case where an undercover agent's cover had been run through a compromised local terminal. When the ghost profile was accessed by a non-credentialed terminal, it generated a silent automated flag. Not an alarm, not a notification to local law enforcement, a single encrypted data packet sent to the DEA's monitoring system, logged with the terminal ID, the timestamp, and the alias name that had been queried. The packet had been sent 11 seconds ago, somewhere in a nondescript office building in Virginia. A monitoring system had registered that the fingerprints of Naomi Burns, the alias currently assigned to Special Agent Naomi Carter, Operation Sandstorm, had been processed at Central Booking, Baltimore City, at 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. The packet would reach the on-call supervisor within 4 minutes. The on-call supervisor would reach Marcus Webb within 9 minutes. Webb would be on a secure line within 12. Naomi did not allow herself to feel relief about this. Relief was for after. Right now, she was in a booking room in an orange processing smock being told to face the height chart for a photograph. And she faced the height chart, and she held her chin level, and her expression in the photograph was completely blank, not defiant, not frightened, not anything that Calloway would be able to use as a data point. Blank Naomi Burns, who this was happening to, Naomi Carter, who was watching it happen and planning what came next. The holding cell was cold, 4 women in a space designed for 3, on a metal bench that had not been designed for comfort and had achieved its design goal completely. Naomi found a corner, sat with her back to the wall, and pulled her knees up slightly to conserve warmth. She did not sleep. She ran the problem. The evidence bag was heroin, or was constructed to appear as heroin. She had not been able to examine it closely enough to determine which. The weight was enough for a mandatory minimum sentence under Maryland law. Calloway's arrest report would be completed within the hour and would be constructed with the practiced craft of someone who has written this story before. It would be airtight on its face, probable cause established through plain sight observation, lawful search, discovery in plain view. The chain of custody would be clean because Calloway had been doing this long enough to know how to make chains of custody clean. The arresting officer's word against the word of a woman with no record and no apparent institutional power, with physical evidence on the table. She had seen this scenario produce convictions. She had seen it produce plea deals from people who should have fought and didn't because fighting costs money and time and certainty that most people in a holding cell at 3 in the morning cannot afford. She was not most people in a holding cell at 3 in the morning, but she had to be careful about when and how she stopped being Naomi Burns, because the timing mattered. 4 hours and 12 minutes after she arrived in the holding cell, a corrections officer appeared at the bars. "Burns? Phone call." The phone was mounted to the wall in a corridor outside the holding area. Heavy institutional handset, a card reader for prepaid accounts, a keypad. Naomi was given 90 seconds. She dialed a number she had memorized 2 years before she was ever assigned to Operation Sandstorm, a local Baltimore number that routed through 2 proxy servers before connecting to a secure DEA line in a building in Virginia. The routing took 4 seconds. The line clicked and a voice answered on the second ring. "Law Offices of David Rosenthal." "David, it's Naomi." She used Naomi Burns's first name and Webb's cover name. Her voice was calibrated. Tired civilian, slightly frightened, controlled. "Naomi Miller, I'm calling from Baltimore Central Booking." I'm in some trouble. A microsecond of silence, the pause of a man who has been waiting for a call that might or might not come, and has just received confirmation that it has come. Naomi? Marcus Webb's voice was steady and warm and gave nothing to anyone who might be monitoring the line. Tell me what happened. They stopped me on Delaware Avenue. They found something in my car. David, it wasn't mine. She kept her voice at the register of a woman who is trying not to fall apart. The officers, they brought it with them. I need you to understand that. They brought it with them. I understand perfectly, Webb said. 3 words that meant message received, corrupt cops, planted evidence, operation compromised. What are the charges? Possession with intent to distribute. It's a large quantity. David, it wasn't mine. Who are the arresting officers? Calloway and Ruiz, Baltimore PD. A 2-second pause that meant Webb was already running those names. I need you to do nothing. Don't sign anything. Don't answer any more questions. Don't talk to anyone in that cell about why you're there. Can you do that? Yes. I'll be in court for your arraignment. We'll handle this carefully. A beat. Are you all right? Just cold, Naomi said. I'll see you in court. She hung up. She was returned to the holding cell. She sat back in her corner, pulled her knees up, and waited for morning. In the squad room of the precinct's 3rd-floor detective bay, Calloway was at a computer terminal, his thick fingers moving across the keyboard with the unhurried confidence of a man writing a document he has written many times before. Ruiz sat at the adjacent desk, his own supplemental report open, his eyes on the screen. Make sure you mention she was uncooperative during the stop, Calloway said without looking up, and that she kept her hands out of sight initially. She put her hands on the wheel before you got to the window, Ruiz said. Calloway typed, she kept them out of sight initially. Ruiz looked at him. Calloway kept his eyes on the screen. The cursor moved across the fabrication with the steady rhythm of practice. Brett, Ruiz said. His voice was carefully level. She was calm the entire time. She complied with everything. She didn't even... They're always calm when they've done it before, Calloway said. The same answer he always gave. The one that ended the conversation the same way it had ended every previous conversation. Write your supplemental, Danny. Judge Carmichael's presiding tomorrow. She hates drug runners. This Burns girl is going to get denied bail. Guaranteed. We just secured our promotion. Ruiz looked at his screen. He typed. What neither of them considered, what Calloway had never needed to consider in 13 years because the targets he selected never had anyone watching, was the question of who else might have been on Delaware Avenue at 1:52 in the morning. The city's traffic camera network had been upgraded 6 months ago. The camera at the intersection of Delaware and Pratt was now 4K resolution, with infrared capability, and it covered 200 feet of Delaware Avenue's shoulder in both directions. And 3 blocks east of that intersection, parked in the shadow of a delivery bay, was an unmarked white panel van. Inside it, Agent Paul Donovan, 26. DEA Technical Operations, the man responsible for Overwatch surveillance on Operation Sandstorm's primary transit corridor, had been watching a live feed from a DEA drone circling at 800 feet when the police cruiser's lights appeared in his monitor at 1:52 a.m. He had watched the entire stop. He had not intervened. The protocol for deep cover situations was non-intervention unless the agent was in immediate physical danger, and Naomi Carter had not been in immediate physical danger. She had been in a situation she could handle. He had, however, recorded everything. The drone footage, the traffic camera feed he was also monitoring, the audio from the directional microphone that had been tracking the transit corridor for 3 weeks. He had recorded Officer Ruiz reaching into the cargo pocket of his tactical pants, removing a sealed bag and placing it inside a vehicle. He had recorded it at 4K resolution in infrared, at a zoom level that made every detail visible. He was... At the moment, Naomi hung up the phone in the holding area corridor, sitting in the van composing a priority message to Marcus Webb that contained a timestamp, a file size, and 4 words: "We have it all. All rise." Courtroom 7B of the Baltimore City Circuit Court was paneled in dark oak that had absorbed 60 years of fluorescent light and turned it into something warmer and older than fluorescent light had any right to produce. The benches were worn smooth. The seal of the state of Maryland above the bench had been repainted twice in the past decade and still looked slightly too bright for its surroundings, like a new employee at a very established firm. The Honorable Patricia Holt had presided over this courtroom for 9 of those 60 years. She was 61, silver-haired, and possessed of the specific judicial demeanor that develops in people who have spent years separating what they are told from what is actually true. Her court reporter, a woman named Linda who had worked for her since the beginning, could read her mood from the set of her shoulders. Her bailiff, a man named George, who had worked for her for 14 years, could read it from the way she arranged her reading glasses on the bench. Neither of them had ever seen her surprised. Holt took her seat. She arranged her glasses. She opened the folder in front of her. "The matter of the state versus Naomi Burns," she said. "Charges: possession of a Schedule I controlled substance with intent to distribute. The weight documented in the arrest report is 85 grams. She looked up. "Mr. Garza, ADA." Kevin Garza was 31 years old, ambitious in the specific way of someone who has worked very hard to get somewhere and intends to keep working hard to go further. He was thorough. He prepared his cases carefully and filed his paperwork on time and had built a conviction rate in his 2 years in the office that was the product of genuine competence rather than corner-cutting. He had been handed the Burns file at 7:15 that morning by his supervisor, who had noted it was a straightforward possession case with solid evidentiary support and would be a quick arraignment before his 11:30 motion hearing. Garza had read the arrest report on the drive over. 2 decorated officers, clear probable cause established through plain view observation of drug paraphernalia in the vehicle interior, followed by a lawful search, discovery of 85 grams of heroin under the driver's seat. The defendant's record was clean, which argued for remand given the weight of the charge and the attendant flight risk. He stood. He straightened his jacket. "Your Honor, the state requests remand without bail. The defendant is charged with possession of 85 grams of heroin with intent to distribute, a quantity that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years under Maryland law. Given the severity of the charge, the weight of the evidence, and the defendant's limited community ties in Baltimore," he had read that Naomi Burns's address was in Columbus, Ohio. "She represents a significant flight risk. The state requests she be held pending trial." It was a competent, clean, well-organized argument. It was also built entirely on a foundation that did not exist. Holt looked at the defense table. "Counselor." Marcus Webb had arrived at courtroom 7B at 8:45, 45 minutes before the docket opened. He was 52 years old, with silver at his temples and the particular quality of stillness that develops in people who have spent careers in rooms where the wrong movement at the wrong moment has consequences. He wore a charcoal gray suit that was expensive without advertising itself. His leather briefcase was old and well-maintained. He had set it on the defense table, exchanged a professional nod with Garza, the nod of opposing counsel who have no history and no animosity, and sat. He had met Naomi's eyes when she was brought in. Shackled, in the orange jumpsuit, and given her the one thing that protocol permitted, a brief, almost imperceptible nod that meant I have what we need. Now he stood. He did not request bail. He did not request a continuance. He said, "Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges with extreme prejudice." The ripple that moved through the courtroom was small but real. A bailiff near the door adjusted his position slightly. The court reporter's fingers paused for half a second. At the prosecution table, Garza looked up from his notes. In the gallery's second row, Officer Brett Calloway, in his Class A uniform, uncrossed his arms. Holt raised one eyebrow. "Counselor, I have a sworn affidavit from 2 decorated officers stating they discovered a large quantity of narcotics in your client's vehicle in plain view following a lawful traffic stop. You are going to need considerably more than a motion to make this disappear." "I have considerably more, Your Honor," Webb said. He opened his briefcase. He removed a manila envelope bearing the eagle-crested seal of the United States Department of Justice, the kind of seal that does not appear on documents unless the document means something. "I have visual evidence that directly contradicts the officer's sworn testimony. May I approach?" Garza was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The state received no such evidence during discovery. This is... The defense came into possession of this evidence at 3:47 this morning," Webb said, calmly and without turning. "It required emergency declassification protocols from the relevant federal agency. The process was completed at 6:12 a.m. I have the authorization chain if the court wishes to review it." Holt held up one hand, a gesture that meant, "Everyone stop moving." She looked at Webb with the expression of a woman who has seen many things in 60 years of living and 9 years on this bench and is currently doing the calculation of whether this is one of the things she has seen before. "Approach," she said. Webb walked to the bench. He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who handed it up to Holt. She broke the seal. Inside, a flash drive in a protective case and a set of 8 by 10 photographs printed on heavy stock, each one bearing a federal authentication watermark in the corner. She looked at the photographs. She looked at them for approximately 15 seconds. Then she put them face down on the bench and looked at Webb with an expression that was not yet readable. "Mr. Webb," she said. Her voice had dropped half a register. "What exactly is your area of practice?" Webb buttoned his suit jacket. The movement was small and deliberate, the kind of thing a person does when they are transitioning from one mode to another. "I am not a private defense attorney, Your Honor." He turned slightly so that his voice carried to the room. "I am Special Agent in Charge Marcus Webb, Drug Enforcement Administration, Baltimore Field Office, and my client is not Naomi Burns." In the gallery, a sound moved through the spectators. Not a gasp, something more contained. The collective intake of a room in which the air has changed. At the prosecution table, Garza's pen stopped moving. In the second row, Calloway's face went very still. Naomi Carter stood up. She did not throw her shoulders back or lift her chin or perform anything. She simply stood in an orange jumpsuit with shackles at her wrists and looked at Judge Holt with the direct, level gaze of a woman who has been waiting patiently for the moment when she could stop being someone else. "Special Agent Naomi Carter," Webb said. "Drug Enforcement Administration, 11-year field agent. For the past 20 months, Agent Carter has been operating in deep cover as Naomi Burns, a logistics coordinator embedded in the distribution network of Miguel Reyes, the regional head of a major cartel's East Coast operations. Her assignment, Operation Sandstorm, is a joint federal investigation coordinating the DEA's Baltimore and D.C. field offices, the FBI's Organized Crime Unit, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland." He paused. She was 11 days from the final coordinated takedown when officers Calloway and Ruiz stopped her vehicle on Delaware Avenue at approximately 1:52 this morning. Garza had stood, his chair scraped backward. He looked at the defense table, at Webb's federal credentials now visible on the briefcase. He looked at the woman standing in shackles. He looked at his arrest report. "Your Honor," Webb continued, "because Agent Carter's cover requires constant federal overwatch on her primary transit routes. The traffic stop on Delaware Avenue was observed and recorded in its entirety by a DEA surveillance drone operating at approximately 800 feet altitude and by Agent Paul Donovan of the DEA's Technical Operations Unit, who was parked within 3 blocks of the stop in an Overwatch vehicle. The footage was recorded at 4K resolution with infrared enhancement. With the court's permission—" "Play it," Holt said. Her voice was very quiet, the quietest it had been since she entered the courtroom. The monitors on the courtroom walls had been arranged by Agent Donovan before the hearing began. He had arrived at 6:30 with a court order and a laptop and had worked quickly and without comment. Now the screens came to life. The footage was black and white, infrared, sharp enough to read license plates and facial expressions. The timestamp in the upper right corner read 1:52:14. It showed Delaware Avenue, the shoulder. Naomi's sedan pulling over with a smooth, unhurried motion that communicated nothing except a driver who had seen lights and pulled over. The courtroom watched in complete silence. They watched Calloway's cruiser pull in behind, fast, close, the angle aggressive. They watched Calloway approach the driver's side, flashlight raised as an instrument of control rather than visibility. They watched Naomi's window go down and her hands appear immediately, flat on the doorframe. Then the footage shifted to a second angle. The DEA drone's zoomed frame, enhanced, the resolution extraordinary. It showed Ruiz moving to the passenger side of the vehicle. It showed him standing beside the car for 11 seconds. It showed him reach into the cargo pocket of his tactical pants with his right hand. It showed him remove a sealed plastic bag, hold it against his thigh for 3 seconds, lean into the vehicle through the passenger door, and withdraw his arm empty. 14 seconds later, it showed him announce the discovery. The footage did not editorialize. It did not need to. It was simply what had happened, recorded by a system that had been in place for reasons that had nothing to do with Brett Calloway, by an agency that had not known he existed until 3:30 this morning, and had captured him with the complete indifference of a machine that records everything in its field of view. When the footage ended, the only sound in courtroom 7 was the faint hum of the projector cooling down. Holt had not moved during the footage. She sat with her hands folded on the bench and her eyes on the screen until it went dark, and then she looked at the gallery. She found Calloway's face. He had not moved either, the face of a man whose primary survival skill has always been controlling his expression and who is, at this specific moment, using every available resource to maintain that control. His right hand, resting on the gallery rail, was closed into a fist with the knuckles pale. Ruiz was not looking at the screen. He had not been looking at the screen. He was looking at the floor. "Agent Webb," Judge Holt said. Her voice was absolutely level in the manner of a person exerting considerable effort to keep it that way. "Are you telling me that these 2 officers planted fabricated evidence on an active federal agent and then filed a sworn police report claiming they discovered it in her vehicle?" "That is precisely what I am telling you, Your Honor." "They manufactured a felony charge to meet a monthly arrest quota, with complete ignorance of who they were targeting. In doing so, they placed Agent Carter's life at risk, compromised a 20-month federal investigation, and nearly destroyed an operation that will result in the removal of a major drug distribution network from the streets of Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Holt picked up her gavel. She set it down without striking the bench, the gesture of a person who has decided that the situation does not require theater. She turned to the prosecution table. Kevin Garza was standing. He had been standing for the past 90 seconds, since the drone footage began, doing the thing that some people in his position have not done and some people in his position will always do, comparing what he had been told to what he was seeing, and allowing the comparison to mean something. He did not look at Calloway. He looked at Judge Holt. "Your Honor," his voice was steady, "the state withdraws its case with prejudice." A pause. "And with apologies to Special Agent Carter." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room not because nothing is happening, but because something very large has just completed itself. Holt looked at Garza for a long moment. In 9 years on this bench, the court reporter Linda thought she had never seen the judge's expression contain quite this combination of elements: respect, relief, and the very specific exhaustion of someone who has just confirmed a worst suspicion. "The apology is noted, Mr. Garza," Holt said. "And it is appreciated." She turned to the gallery, to Calloway, to Ruiz. Her voice dropped to something that was quieter than anything she had said before, and more final. "Bailiff, secure the doors. Those 2 men do not leave this courtroom." Calloway moved before Holt finished the sentence. 13 years of operating ahead of consequences had built reflexes that functioned independently of thought, the body responding to threat signals before the mind had fully processed what the signals meant. He was out of the gallery bench, turning toward the rear doors, in the same motion that had gotten him out of bad situations before. Not thinking run, but simply moving, the way an animal moves when the environment changes in a way that means danger. He covered the distance to the rear doors in 5 strides. He hit them with his shoulder, hard, full weight, expecting the give of a door opening outward into a corridor and the possibility of distance and time. The doors opened from the other side. The kinetic collision sent him stumbling backward 2 steps. In the doorway stood 4 men in dark tactical gear. The vests said U.S. Marshals in yellow letters that were not ambiguous. The lead marshal was a large man with a flat, professional expression and a taser raised at a 45-degree angle, the red targeting dot sitting on the center of Calloway's chest. "Going somewhere, officer." The voice was the voice of someone who asks questions they already know the answer to. Calloway's hands went up. They did not go up because he decided to raise them. They went up because the red dot was on his chest, and his body understood what a red dot meant before his mind caught up with the rest of what was happening. He stood in the doorway of courtroom 7B with his hands in the air, and the U.S. Marshals arrayed in front of him, and the courtroom silent behind him. And for the first time in 13 years on the Baltimore Police Department, Brett Calloway had nowhere to go. Ruiz had not moved. He had known, from the moment the drone footage began playing on the courtroom monitors, that there was nowhere to move to. He had watched the footage with the specific, terrible clarity of a person seeing an action they participated in, rendered permanent and objective, stripped of the justifications and the rationalizations and the voice that had said, "This is how it works. This is what you do when you're partnered with someone like Calloway. This is survival," and left as simply what it was. A man reaching into his own pocket and placing a bag of narcotics in a car that did not belong to him. He had been 4 years on the force. He had been partnered with Calloway for 3 of them. In that time, he had written 9 supplemental reports that he knew contained fabrications he had not fabricated himself but had allowed to stand. He had told himself, each time, that speaking up cost more than it was worth, that the machine protected the people inside it, that the answer to a bad situation was to wait for a better one. He had waited for 3 years, and the better situation had not arrived, and the situation had gotten worse instead. And tonight, it had arrived at a federal courtroom, and shown itself on a monitor in 4K infrared, and the specific relief that moved through him when he understood that it was over, that the waiting was finished, was something he would spend a long time examining afterward. He stood up. He turned to face Judge Holt. His hands were trembling slightly, and he let them tremble because the trembling was honest and he had run out of the energy required to perform composure. "Your Honor." His voice cracked on the second syllable. He pushed through it. "I need to make a statement. I want to cooperate. I have information." He breathed. The Evans stop. The Camara stop. The Williams stop. The Osei stop. I have dates, locations, the evidence bag numbers he used. He has done this before. I watched him do it. I wrote the supplementals. He stopped. Not because there was nothing Carter left to say. Because the weight of what he had been carrying for 3 years had finally been put down. And the putting down of it was its own kind of collapse. He stood in front of the bench with his hands shaking and his eyes wet and his uniform still pressed and clean. And it looked like what it was, a man who had waited too long and had finally, at great cost, stopped waiting. Judge Holt looked at him for a long time. The room was very quiet. "Officer Ruiz," she said. Her voice was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was the voice of a judge who understands that the truth is valuable regardless of what it costs the person telling it. "Your statement will be taken in full. You will be given every opportunity to tell this court everything you know, every stop, every name, every date, every evidence number." She paused. "Starting right now." Webb walked down the center aisle with the economy of motion of a man who has planned each step of this sequence and is now executing it. He stopped in front of Calloway, who had been brought back into the courtroom by 2 of the marshals and was standing near the gallery rail with his hands partially raised and the red dot gone from his chest, but the marshals very much present on either side. Webb opened the leather folder he had been carrying since he walked into the courtroom 2 hours ago. He had not opened it before now because there had not been a need to open it before now. "Brett Calloway," he said. His voice carried to every corner of the room without effort. "You are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. You are under arrest for evidence tampering, perjury, and obstruction of a federal investigation. You are further under arrest for a pattern of conduct." He turned one page. "Constituting 11 documented instances of the above offenses over a period of approximately 32 months, as will be detailed by the cooperating testimony of your partner and by the forensic review of your department-issued evidence inventory." Calloway's face had done its work for as long as it could. The control was still there. Technically, his expression had not collapsed the way Ruiz's had, but the thing behind the control had changed. It was no longer the flat confidence of a man who expects the system to rotate in his favor. It was something denser and colder, the expression of a man who is running the numbers for the first time in 13 years and does not like what they produce. "You wanted a mandatory minimum, Sobal," Webb said. He closed the folder. "Congratulations, officer. You just earned one." The lead marshal removed the handcuffs from Calloway's duty belt, the same cuffs Calloway had used on Naomi's wrists 4 hours ago on Delaware Avenue, and secured them around Calloway's own wrists behind his back. The sound they made was mechanical and small, and in the particular silence of courtroom 7B carried perfectly to every bench. At the defense table, the bailiff knelt beside Naomi's chair and unlocked the shackles at her wrists. The metal fell away. She rolled her wrists once, slowly, and stood. She did not look at Calloway being cuffed. She looked at Ruiz. He was standing near the gallery rail, a marshal on each side, his hands cuffed in front of him at his own request because he had asked if he could be cuffed in front, and the marshal had said yes. He was looking at the floor. Then, as though he felt the weight of her attention, he looked up. Naomi Carter looked at Officer Danny Ruiz for a long moment. It was not a forgiving look, because that was not what it was, and she was not someone who performed emotions she didn't feel. But it was a look that contained acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of a person who recognizes that another person did something hard and does not pretend it was nothing, even if it came too late, even if it did not undo what it should have prevented. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked away. Webb appeared at her shoulder. "Cover is burned," he said quietly. "Donovan's already coordinating. 16 locations. Reyes's network goes tonight. How many agents? 41 DEA, 11 FBI, vetted local support. We execute at 2A. She nodded once. 20 months of work, not her timeline. But the work would produce what it was built to produce: the arrests, the seizures, the dismantling of a distribution network that had been moving narcotics through Baltimore and D.C. for 4 years. The timing had been changed. The result had not. "Good," she said. Holt struck the bench once, a single, final sound. "All charges against Special Agent Carter are dismissed with extreme prejudice. This court is adjourned." She looked at the marshals. "Get them out." Naomi picked up her purse, returned to her at intake, now back on her shoulder where it belonged, and walked toward the courtroom doors. The gallery parted. The marshals moved Calloway to the left. She passed within 4 feet of him without turning her head. She went through the doors and into the courthouse corridor, which was ordinary and fluorescent and smelled of floor cleaner and old paper, and she stood in it for a moment and breathed. The names were in a folder on her desk 3 days later. Webb had sent it to her secure email with a subject line that said only, "Review when ready." She had read it 3 times. Then she had printed it and put it in a physical folder and sat at her kitchen table in her actual apartment. Not the cover apartment on Guilford Avenue, not the DEA safe house on Eastern Avenue, but the 3rd-floor walk-up in Hampton where she actually lived, with the too many books and the east-facing window, and read it again with a cup of coffee that went cold before she got to the 2nd page. 11 stops, 32 months. Calloway's evidence inventory, forensically reconstructed by a DEA accountant named Torres, who had spent 4 days cross-referencing seized property logs against destruction records, showed a consistent pattern: narcotics checked out for undercover buy operations, logged as expended, but with quantities that did not match the recorded transactions. The discrepancy, per Torres's report, was consistent with an officer retaining a portion of seized narcotics for use in planted evidence stops. 11 stops meant 11 people, not a number. 11 individual people, each with a specific night and a specific moment, when a car door opened and their life took a turn that they did not cause and could not have anticipated. She read each case file individually. Marcus Evans, 34, high school history teacher at a public school in West Baltimore, stopped on a Tuesday evening in March, 14 months ago. Calloway's report cited erratic driving. The evidence, 30 grams of cocaine, found in the driver's side door pocket. Evans was arrested, charged, and held in pretrial detention for 8 months while his case worked through the system. He was represented by a public defender who was handling 63 other cases simultaneously and did not have the bandwidth to investigate the stop with the depth it deserved. The case was eventually dismissed, not because anyone proved the evidence was planted, but because the chain of custody documentation had a gap that the prosecutor's office did not catch until the night before trial. 8 months in pretrial detention. Evans lost his teaching position after the first month. The school system's policy was clear. Criminal charges pending trial were grounds for suspension. He fought to get his position back after the dismissal. He was rehired 7 months later, at a different school, with a formal note in his personnel file that the charges had been dismissed and no admission of guilt was implied. He was back in a classroom. He had lost 8 months of his career, his students, his standing in the school community, and the specific quality of mourning that belongs to a person who wakes up knowing where they will be going that day. He had gained, as a result of Calloway's choices, a file with his name on it that would appear in background checks for the foreseeable future regardless of what the file said. James Camara, 28, forklift operator at a warehouse distribution facility in Dundalk, stopped on a Friday night in July, 19 months ago. Calloway's report: marijuana odor from the vehicle. The evidence: 40 grams of heroin in a gym bag in the trunk. Camara maintained from the first moment that the bag was not his and he had never seen it before. His public defender told him the truth, which was that the jury would see a sworn officer's testimony. A physical evidence bag with his DNA on the exterior. Contamination from handling. Camara had touched it when Ruiz had shown it to him, and a quantity that made a possession charge difficult to defend without evidence of planting. His public defender told him he was looking at 7 to 10 years if he went to trial and lost, or 18 months if he took the plea. James Camara was 28 years old. He had a daughter, 7 months old. Her name was Imani. He took the plea. He served 18 months in a state facility. He was released 14 months ago. The facility's re-entry program helped him find work at a different warehouse, smaller, less pay. No benefits yet. He was rebuilding. His daughter was 2 years old now, according to the file's most recent update, and apparently already trying to run. 18 months. A father's daughter's first steps, first words, first attempts to run, 18 months of that, gone, taken. Not by a jury's verdict after a fair trial, but by a man at a computer terminal inventing probable cause to meet a monthly number. Aaliyah Williams, 22, nursing student in her 3rd year of clinical training at a hospital in East Baltimore, stopped on a Sunday afternoon in September. 11 months ago, Calloway's report cited a broken taillight. The evidence: 20 grams of cocaine in the passenger seat. Aaliyah Williams's case had been different from the others in one specific way. She had fought it. She had refused the plea deal. She had insisted to her public defender, to the assistant DEA, to everyone who would listen, that the cocaine was not hers and that she had watched an officer place it in her car. Her public defender believed her but could not prove it. The case was continued twice, then continued again. During the 11 months of continuances, her clinical placement, the placement she needed to complete her nursing degree, had been suspended because the hospital's policy required it for students facing pending criminal charges. She deferred a year of school. She worked part-time at a pharmacy. She went to court 4 times. On the 5th court date, Calloway's arrest had triggered the federal investigation's scope, and her charges were among those that were swept into the review. She was exonerated. Her record was cleared. She had just recently returned to her clinical program. Naomi read that last detail, recently returned to clinical, and put her coffee cup down and sat very still for a moment. She called Webb. "I've read the files," she said. "All 11?" "All 11. A pause. "The conviction review unit is already on Evans and Camara. Williams's charges were dropped as part of the scope expansion. The others are being assessed." He paused again. "This is the part of the job that doesn't have a clean ending. Naomi." "I know." She had known this for 11 years. The clean ending was a fiction. The story people told about justice to make it feel like a complete thing, with a beginning and an end and a resolution that could be summarized in a sentence. The actual thing was more complicated and more partial. and required more ongoing maintenance than any narrative wanted to admit. Have you spoken to Garza? Yesterday. He's requested a full audit of every case involving Calloway that passed through his office. He found a beat. He's also requested that both be referred to conviction review. Good. She meant it specifically about Garza, not just about the outcome. A prosecutor who withdraws a case in open court when the evidence contradicts his file is doing the job correctly. A prosecutor who then audits his own work without being required to is doing something rarer. She had not expected it and was glad to be wrong. Operation Sandstorm executed at 2:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. Naomi was not there. She was in Webb's field office, writing the Delaware Avenue incident report, which Webb had insisted on before she did anything else related to the operation. It was the correct call. The Calloway case needed her full documented account while the details were precise and complete, and she wrote it with the specificity her training required, which meant 4 hours of careful documentation. She was finishing the last section when her phone buzzed. Donovan. Reyes is in custody. 38 arrests total. Sandstorm is complete. She put the phone down. She looked at the report on the screen. 20 months of work, distilled into incident documentation. She thought about Miguel Reyes in a federal holding cell somewhere in Baltimore at 2 in the morning, and about the 41 field agents who had just spent 6 hours dismantling a distribution network she had spent 20 months mapping, and about the specific quality of completion that comes when a mission produces the result it was designed to produce. Then she thought about James Kamara's daughter, who was 2 years old and already trying to run. About Marcus Evans, back in a classroom with a note in his personnel file. About Aaliyah Williams, back in her clinical program. 11 months behind where she should have been, Sandstorm was complete. The machine that Calloway had been operating, quietly and without consequence, for 32 months, was not. The conviction review would take time. The full accounting of 11 cases, the identification of everyone who had been affected, the determination of what could be remedied and what could not. The slow, procedural work of attempting to restore what was restorable would take considerably more time than anyone wanted. She added one more paragraph to her incident report that was not standard field documentation. She described Darius, not by name, she wrote a family member, but with the specific details that made him real. 19 years old, a car on a street, a planted charge, 3 years served. The conviction overturned 18 months in. She wrote that she had joined the DEA the year this person came home. She wrote that the night on Delaware Avenue had not been the first time she had seen the inside of a situation like this. She wrote that the people whose names appeared in Brett Calloway's fabricated arrest reports were not abstract victims. They were people with specific lives and specific futures that had been altered by specific choices that a man in a uniform made because he had decided the badge made him immune to consequence. Webb read the paragraph when she submitted the report. He looked at her across his desk. "I'm leaving it in," he said. "I know," she said. The federal trial of Brett Calloway was scheduled for 6 months after the arrest. His defense attorney, a former public defender named Harrigan, who had made a career pivot to criminal defense and had a reputation for finding procedural angles in difficult cases, spent 4 weeks reviewing the evidence package and called Naomi on a Thursday afternoon. "I need to be honest with you," Harrigan said. "I've been through everything. The drone footage, Ruiz's cooperation agreement, the inventory forensics, the 11 case files. I cannot find a lane." A pause. "He wants to plead." The sentencing was conducted 6 months later. The federal judge, a man named Howard Park, who had been on the bench for 11 years and had a reputation for sentencing remarks that were direct to the point of discomfort, leaned forward over the bench before he announced the sentence. "You did not make mistakes, Officer Calloway," Park said. You made choices, repeated, deliberate, calculated choices over a period of nearly 3 years to use the authority that this country placed in you as a weapon against people you had decided didn't matter. You selected your targets with care. You chose people you believed had no recourse, no power, no one watching. You were wrong about the watching. You were catastrophically wrong about the consequences. 14 years, no possibility of parole, full pension forfeiture, a permanent bar from any law enforcement position at any level anywhere in the United States. Ruiz entered a cooperation agreement and received 4 years suspended to 2. With mandatory community service, he would never work in law enforcement again. He wrote a letter to James Camara, not to apologize in the way that requests forgiveness, but to explain what he saw and what he failed to do about it, and to say plainly that he was sorry in the specific way of someone who understands that sorry does not give back 18 months. Camara received the letter and read it once and put it in a drawer and did not respond. That was his right. Ruiz accepted it. Kevin Garza was promoted 6 months after the sentencing to chief of the Special Prosecutions Unit. He did not mention Courtroom 7B in his acceptance remarks. He did not need to. She drove to West Baltimore on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the Callaway sentencing. It was November again, almost exactly a year after Delaware Avenue. The same low gray light, the same quality of cold that settled into the city between Halloween and Thanksgiving and didn't leave until April. She parked on the street outside the Marcus X Community Center, a converted 2-story building with a basketball court on the ground floor and tutoring rooms on the second. And she sat in the car for a few minutes. Not because she didn't know what she wanted to say. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. She had been composing versions of it for 6 years, in the half-aware way that people compose conversations they need to have but can't quite find the right time for. She was sitting in the car because she was deciding whether she had the right to initiate this conversation now, whether the outcome of the past year had earned it, or whether it was something she was doing for herself under the cover of doing it for him. She got out of the car. The front desk was unmanned on a Saturday morning, but the sound of sneakers on hardwood and the particular acoustics of a gymnasium drifted down the hallway from the left. She followed it. The gym was the kind of space that becomes itself through use, scuffed floor, uneven lighting at the far end, a scoreboard with one number stuck at 0 that had apparently given up partway through someone's tenure. 8 12-year-olds were attempting a defensive rotation drill with the specific combination of enthusiasm and spatial chaos that characterized their age group. 2 of them were arguing about positioning. One was doing something to the other's shoelace that was technically unrelated to basketball. Darius Carter was at the center of it, running the drill with the patient energy of someone who has learned to work in the chaos rather than against it. He was 25 years old, lean in the way of people who are active without being deliberate about it. And he had the specific quality of attention that Naomi associated with people who have learned through hard experience that details matter, that paying attention is not optional. He had learned it in a way she wished he hadn't had to. He had kept it. He saw her from across the gym. He held eye contact for a moment, not surprised, not guarded, just acknowledging. He finished the drill, called a water break with the authority of someone who has been doing this long enough that the kids responded to it as a reflex, and walked across the gym. They stood in the middle of the basketball court with the gym noise around them, kids arguing, sneakers on wood, the distant sound of a radio from the second floor. And Darius looked at his sister. "Did you get him?" he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded. The nod of someone who has been waiting for this answer and receiving it does not change the fact of what came before it. 14 years, she said. No parole? He was quiet. He processed information slowly and thoroughly. Another thing that had not changed since before the arrest, and had not changed after it. He was not a person who reacted first and thought second. "What about the other people?" he said. "The ones he did it to before." She had prepared for this question. She told him about Evans, Kamara, Williams. She told him about the conviction review unit, about the 2 cases Garza had referred, about the forensic audit of Calloway's evidence inventory. She told him that 3 cases were being actively investigated and that 2 of them looked likely to be overturned within the year. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, his eyes on her face. "Good," he said, when she finished, not as a general statement, as a specific assessment of specific information that he was deciding was sufficient. From the water fountain end of the gym, a small argument had developed about whose turn it was at the front of the line. Darius glanced over, assessed it as non-critical, looked back at Naomi. She had been trying to say something for 6 years. She had tried in the month he came home, when she had sat in their mother's kitchen and wanted to ask it and hadn't been able to. She had tried in the first year after the DEA, when the work was new enough that she could have said it was the work that led her here. She had tried twice in the 3 years of the assignment, in brief calls that were conducted through cover phones on cover lines and couldn't carry the weight of real conversation. "Was it worth it?" she said. He looked at her. She made herself be specific. "The 3 years, the conviction, the way it changed things, was any of it, is it?" She stopped. She had a vocabulary for field reports and threat assessments and chain of custody documentation. She did not have a clean vocabulary for this. "I need to know if you're okay." Darius looked at his sister for a long time. She watched him do what he always did with hard questions. Hold them, turn them, find the honest answer rather than the comfortable one. "It happened," he said. Not defensively, as a statement of fact that he had clearly made peace with through the specific, ongoing effort of making peace with things. "I don't spend time deciding if it was worth it. That's not a productive question for me. I just try to make the next thing better than the thing before it." He gestured toward the kids. One of them had abandoned the water fountain dispute and was attempting to teach another one to spin a basketball on one finger, with extremely limited success. The teacher was as invested in this as if it were the most important thing happening in the world right now, which for him, it probably was. "Half of these kids have someone, a brother, an uncle, who's been inside," Darius said. "Not all of them for good reason. I can't fix what happened to them, but I can be someone they see every day who came out the other side and is still showing up." He paused. "That's the work. That's what I've got." Naomi looked at her brother, at the man he had built himself into from something that had tried very hard to break him and had not managed it entirely, had changed the shape of him, permanently, in ways she was still learning, but had not broken. At 25 years old, running a basketball drill in a converted building in West Baltimore, with the patience of someone who has learned that showing up consistently is more powerful than any single dramatic gesture. She had spent 11 years trying to fix a machine. She had gotten 1 man convicted and 12 more cases reviewed and 1 distribution network dismantled, and she was going to get up tomorrow and do it again. Darius had spent 3 years inside something that should not have been his to survive and had come out of it and was here, every Saturday, being someone the kids could see. She thought about which of those things was more difficult. She did not have an answer. "He did it to 11 people," she said. "That we know of. Then find the rest," Darius said. A whistle from across the gym. One of the other coaches calling the kids back for the second half of the drill. Darius straightened. He was already turning back toward the court, his attention flowing back to where it belonged. "Come next Saturday," he said over his shoulder. "We're playing Coppin Street. We are going to lose badly." A brief pause, and in it the closest thing to humor that the morning had contained. "But the kids play hard." "I'll be there," Naomi said. She meant it completely. She sat in her car outside the community center for a few minutes after she came out. She did not think about Calloway. She thought about James Kamara's daughter, who was 2 years old and already trying to run. She thought about Marcus Evans, back in a classroom. She thought about Aaliyah Williams, who was somewhere in a clinical rotation right now, learning how to take care of people. She thought about Darius calling the water break and the kids responding without argument and what it meant to be someone people listen to because they want to, not because they have to. She started the car and drove home. There was work tomorrow. There was always work. The federal trial of Miguel Reyes was scheduled for the spring. Naomi testified on a Tuesday in April, which she noted only because the case that had nearly ended Operation Sandstorm had started on a Tuesday in November. And there was something complete about that. Not poetic, just complete. The way a door closing sounds different from a door slamming, even if the result is the same. She sat in a federal courtroom, larger than courtroom 7B, more formal, with the specific weight of a space where decisions of significant consequence are made regularly and the architecture has absorbed it over the years. She wore her own clothes. She used her own name. She had not used her own name in a federal courtroom in 20 months, and the experience of it, of not constructing each word around the requirements of a false identity, had a quality she had not fully anticipated. Not relief, exactly. More like the specific sensation of putting down something heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten you were carrying it. She testified for 3 hours. She did not dramatize. She used the same flat, careful language she used for incident reports, specific dates, specific exchanges, specific quantities and locations and names. The Reyes defense attorney had prepared for a DEA agent who would perform for the jury, who would use the weight of 20 months of sacrifice as a rhetorical instrument. He got instead a woman who described 20 months of her life with the precision of a scientist describing an experiment. And this, the jury later said in post-verdict interviews, was more disturbing than theater would have been. The specificity, the duration. The particular Tuesday night in November, when a corrupt cop with a bag of planted heroin had nearly made 20 months of work disappear, Miguel Reyes received 22 years. 11 members of his distribution network received sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years, based on their individual roles and the evidence Naomi's 20 months of embedded work had produced. The East Coast pipeline that had been moving narcotics through Baltimore and D.C. for 4 years was, in the specific and practical sense, finished. Not permanently, because nothing in the narcotics enforcement landscape was ever permanently finished, but finished in the way that matters. The network dismantled, the leadership incarcerated, the routes disrupted, the city's streets carrying less poison than they had been carrying yesterday. She walked out of the courthouse at 4:15 in the afternoon into a Tuesday in April that was overcast and smelled of the particular combination of rain coming and city that Baltimore produced in spring. She stood on the steps for a moment, not in triumph. There was nothing triumphant about what she felt, which was the specific, worn-edged satisfaction of a person who has completed a very long piece of work and knows that there is more work waiting. Marcus Webb was at the bottom of the steps. He had been in the gallery for the testimony and had left before she finished, which was how Webb operated, present for what mattered, gone before the ceremony. "Reyes?" she said. 22 years, he said. She nodded. "Good." They stood for a moment in the way that people stand when they have worked alongside each other through something significant and have arrived at the end of it and don't have a protocol for what the end feels like. "What's next?" she said. Memphis, Webb said. "There's a case. I'll send you the brief." "Send it tonight," she said. She walked to her car. Webb walked to his. That was the end of Operation Sandstorm. Not a ceremony, not a celebration. Just two professionals at the bottom of a courthouse steps, deciding what came next. The letter came on a Friday morning in November. Naomi was at her kitchen table with coffee, in her actual apartment, the third-floor walk-up in Hampton, with the east-facing window that showed the sky before it showed the street, which was why she had chosen it. The return address was a hospital in East Baltimore. The handwriting on the envelope was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had thought about what they wanted to say before they committed it to paper. She opened it. "My name is Aaliyah Williams. I don't know exactly who to write to, but my attorney told me that the investigation that cleared my name started with a DEA case, and that there were people who worked to make it happen. I wanted someone who was part of it to know what it meant. I passed my nursing boards 3 weeks ago. I'm working pediatric oncology at Johns Hopkins. I wanted to be a nurse since I was 9 years old, and there were 11 months when I didn't know if I was going to get there. I almost quit. I need to be honest about that. After the third continuance, after the second time my clinical placement was suspended, I sat in my apartment and I thought about whether the fight was worth it. I decided to keep going. I'm glad I decided that. I take care of kids who are fighting for their lives every day, and I think about what it means to not give up when giving up would be easier. And I think they deserve someone who knows what that feels like from the inside. I don't know your name, but thank you. Not just for what happened to the officer, for what happened to the other people, for the ones whose names I'll never know. Aaliyah Williams, R.N. Naomi read the letter twice. She set it on the kitchen table beside her coffee. She looked at it for a moment, the careful handwriting, the hospital return address, the specific weight of a letter from someone who has come out the other side of something and taken the time to reach back. She thought about Darius at the community center, running his drill. She thought about James Kamara's daughter, who was 2 years old and running. She thought about Marcus Evans, back in a classroom with his students. She thought about Calloway in a federal cell, and found, as Darius had once described his own process with things that couldn't be changed, that she thought about him less and less, which was the correct direction. She put the letter in a drawer where she kept the things that mattered. She finished her coffee. She got her jacket, picked up her keys, and went to work. The machine was still broken in places. That was why she was still here. There were more names. There was always more work. And somewhere in East Baltimore, in a pediatric ward on a Friday morning, a nurse named Aaliyah Williams was taking care of kids who needed her, which was exactly where she was always supposed to be.